Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about creating timers or timed events. So let's say in your code, you want something to happen after a specific number of seconds, right? Or you want to have a recurring thing happening over time. We're going to talk about different strategies that we can use to create all sorts of timers and timed events in JavaScript. Okay, so let's start with just kind of a basic one. This is built into JavaScript. There is functionality in JavaScript for you to basically say, set up a timer, and then when the timer runs out, call a particular function. Okay, and we're going to demonstrate that. We're going to create a variable here called background, and we're going to use that variable to set the background color of our sketch. Okay? And then we're going to create a function here. We're going to call it change background color. Okay? And in that function, we're going to set the background to, let's say, red. Okay? And then in setup, we are going to initiate what's called a timeout. So we're going to use setTimeout. And setTimeout takes two parameters. The first one is going to be the function we want to call. So we're going to say change background color. And then the second parameter is going to be the amount of time we want to wait before that function runs. So let's say this is going to be an amount of time in milliseconds. So if we wanted to, let's say, wait 3 seconds before we change the background color, we would set a timeout like so, and we would put in 3000. So let's run the sketch. And 3 seconds from the start of the sketch, the background is going to change to red. So it's going to run this function. We can put a little log here as well. That's going to happen after 3 seconds. Okay? So this is the most basic way to set up these kind of timers in JavaScript. You can define a callback function. This is the function you want to run when the time runs out. Okay, got the timeout. There is another one called setInterval. Interval is similar to a timeout, except it's going to repeatedly call the function every 3 seconds. Okay? So this is going to change the function here after 3 seconds, and then you see it's getting called again. So we could pick from like a random color every 3 seconds or something like this. So interval it's gonna continuously call that function every 3 seconds. Okay? So let's go back to timeout here. Now the downside of these, they're very easy to use, but the problem is when you set up a timeout is, let's say you wanted to know the amount of time, that's like how much time you have left. Maybe you're programming a game and you want to give some feedback to your player, maybe have some kind of countdown happening or whatever. So in this context, using these functions, we don't have access to that. All that we know is this function is going to run when the time is up. So these can be useful for simple little timers, but let's look at a different approach to creating timers. Okay? So I'm going to delete this. So instead, we're going to kind of create our timer manually. And to do this, we're going to rely on a function called millis. Now let's use console.log here to output the value we get from millis. So millis, as you can see, is just a number that goes up, right? It's basically a stopwatch that starts when you hit play on your sketch, and that measures the number of milliseconds that have passed since the beginning of the sketch. So this is just a number that's going to go up all the time. And we can use this millis function basically as a time reference. And if we compare the value of millis against a known timestamp, we'll be able to look at the difference and see how much time has elapsed since we recorded that timestamp. Okay? So here's what I mean. Let's create a variable. We're going to call it timestamp. Okay? And at the beginning of our sketch, we are going to say timestamp equals millis. So we start the clock, right? We're going to save the value of millis. And then instead of looking at the value of millis here, we're going to look at the value of millis minus timestamp. Okay? So this is the amount of time that's elapsed since we recorded the timestamp, which in this case is at the beginning of the sketch. Now, what if we added some code here? When I press the mouse, we're going to reset that timestamp. We're going to say timestamp equals millis. So we're going to update our recorded time value to be the current time. Okay? So now the console.log, right? I have basically this timer that I can reset, right? this is going to start counting up from the last time that I clicked. Okay? So we can use that to build a timer idea. We can basically say, let's get rid of the console.log here. It's a little bit slow. Let's say we wanted to have a particular duration, right? Maybe 3 seconds or 3000 milliseconds, right? We could say in draw, right? If if millis minus timestamp is greater than the duration, right? That means the timer has basically expired. And we could do something like change the background color to something else. So now 3 seconds from the start of my sketch, the background is going to turn red. Okay? This is interesting because we can basically know, unlike with setTimeout, now we can know how much time has been elapsed in the duration of this timer. Okay, and we could also maybe in the else here, we're going to set the background to black. Okay, so that if I can reset it as well. So once it's triggered to red, right? If I click, I can reset back to black, and then it's going to wait another 3 seconds before this if statement triggers again. And this is useful because we now basically we have the ability to know how much time has been elapsed here, and this is this difference. So let's put it into a variable. Let's call this variable time elapsed. Okay, and this is going to be this difference. So the current time minus our timestamp is the amount of time that's been elapsed since the last time we reset. So we can use that to, of course, decide if the timer has expired, if it's greater than our duration. Okay. We can also use this to create some animations, right? So for example, maybe I want to draw an arc, like we're going to draw a circle that fills up as the time of as our timer runs out. We are going to calculate an angle for this arc. We're going to map the time elapsed, right? Which we know is going to be between 0 and duration. We're going to map it to an angle between 0 and 2 pi, or let's change the angle mode to 360 so we don't lose those of you who are allergic to pi, and we're going to say 0 to 360 degrees. Okay, and we're going to use that to draw an arc. An arc is like a circle where we're going to say arc centered in the middle of the screen. We're going to put the width and the height, so let's say 200 by 200, and then the start angle and the end angle of the arc. So the end angle is going to be our angle right here. Now, this time elapsed might exceed the duration, right? So the timer can exceed. So we are going to make sure that we constrain time elapse. We're going to constrain it to be between 0 and duration, okay, to make sure that we don't kind of go over the 360 degrees. So let's run this. And obviously, oh, sorry. You cannot do angle mode 360. I don't know what I was thinking. You have to write degrees. It's been that kind of a day. All right. So now not only do we have the ability to create timed events, right? So I can reset the timer on my mouse press, which simply means updating the timestamp to catch up with the current time. But unlike with setTimeout or setInterval, because we basically keep track of the timer ourselves, we can also know how far we are, right, in terms of that timer. We can look at this time elapsed value, and we can use that to map something, right? We could map a progress bar. We could do whatever we want with this. We could draw the time elapsed itself. We could do like a count, right? We could draw that value. So that's maybe a little bit more involved, but perhaps maybe more useful way of thinking about timers. Okay? All right. So having done this, we're going to go also one step further in this example. We could improve on this in a number of ways. So first of all, maybe you don't like to think in terms of milliseconds, right? So having to set your durations in milliseconds, maybe that's counterintuitive for whatever reason. Of course, we could change this to refer to seconds. What does it mean? Well, it simply means that we are going to take our time elapsed, right? And we're going to divide it. We're going to divide this difference by 1000. Okay, so if we don't want to think in terms of milliseconds, that's fine. We're just going to divide everything by 1000. So first improvement. And this is now a value in seconds. So Could be a little easier for some of us to wrap our heads around. The other thing we could do is, let's say we're going to have a program or a game that's going to involve multiple different concurrent timers. We could take this concept of a timer. This would be a good example of something we could package as a class. So let's see how we would do this. We're going to write a timer class that's going to be reusable so that we can have multiple timers going at once, and maybe they have different, different durations and so forth. So let's take what we've done here with the little timer code and let's package it as a reusable object. So we're going to add these lines here just so it's easier to navigate our code, and let's create our timer class. Okay? So always the first thing we're going to put into a class is a constructor. So we're going to put our constructor here, and it might be a good idea to put duration as a parameter to the constructor. So when we create a new timer, we'll say how long we want that timer to be. And then inside the timer object, we're going to save that duration as a parameter. So we'll say this.duration equals the duration. And we're also going to create a timestamp. And we're going to start that timestamp to be equal to millis, just like we're doing up here with our variables. Okay. Then we can add a few features to this timer. We could say, okay, well, let's add a time elapsed function. That's going to calculate how much time has elapsed between when we started the timer and how much, what we set the duration to be. So let's define this variable here. I'm going to call it t just for short, and we'll say we set time elapsed, right, is millis minus this.timestamp. And we're going to divide that by 1,000 because we want to be dealing with seconds, not milliseconds, let's say, for our timers. Okay. All right. We're also going to constrain this value. So constrain takes the number, right, and it's going to make sure it stays within certain bounds, because as time continues to forge on, right, we're going to exceed the duration of our timer. So this will ensure that time elapsed is never going to exceed the duration of the timer. So we're going to constrain it between this and duration. All right. And then we could simply return the value. Right? So this is a little convenience feature so that if we want to ask the timer how much time has elapsed, it will tell us based on this, this value. Okay? And based on this, we could add a function. Let's say we're going to say is expired. Right? So this is going to tell us true or false. Is this timer expired? Well, how do we know? We can say if the this dot time elapsed, if it's greater or equal to this dot duration, well, it has expired. Otherwise, it hasn't. Right? So just a little convenience function. And we could also add, let's add a reset function. So what does it mean to reset our timer? Simply means take the timestamp, make it equal to right now, right? Just update the timestamp to catch up with the current value of the clock. So now that we've created a simple little timer class, let's see how we would use it in this example. We're going to replace these individual variables with our timer object. So let's just create a timer. We're going to define a variable called timer. And then in setup, we're going to say timer equals new timer. Let's go with 3 seconds again. Okay. And then in draw, we're going to change this, this code a little bit to use our object instead. Okay, we're going to say here, we're going to map this angle. So now we're going to map the timer dot time elapsed, which goes from 0 to timer dot duration. Oh, we don't need to constrain it. That's already been constrained, right? So we're going to map timer dot time elapsed. That goes from 0 to timer dot duration. We're going to map it to a number between 0 and 360. And then here we'll say if timer dot is expired, right? We don't have to ask. We've already kind of built in that feature. We could change the background. Okay. So this is just another way of packaging the code so that we have a reusable object. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, let's say we're going to leave the background black, okay? And we're going to create 2 different timers. We'll have timer 1 and timer 2. Let's create timer 2 to be new timer 5 seconds instead. Okay, so now I can have multiple timers because I've taken the time to write a class. And we can draw 2 different arcs. You know, maybe we'll create angle 2 here. That's going to be mapping the timer 2 time. Angle 2. So now I have timer 1 and timer 2. And of course, it would help if I drew them not overlapping each other. So I'm going to move one over to the left. And then that one, we're going to move it over to the right by 200. Okay, so now I have 2 different timers. One of them is 3 seconds. The other one is 5 seconds. Okay? And of course, I could reset them the same way. Here for simplicity, let's put back, let's bring back mouse pressed. And we could say, you know, timer.reset and timer2.reset. In this example, we're just going to reset them both on mouse pressed. So this is another way that we could approach creating timers. Using that approach would be worthwhile if you think you're going to have multiple different timers going in your game. So taking the time to represent them as a reusable template or reusable class could be beneficial. Now we have a timer object we can create, and then we can use whatever functionality we put into the class here. So we can ask this timer how much time has elapsed. We can ask, is it expired? And we can reset it. Okay, so we can have different timed events, and unlike what we've done in the past, which was relying on frame count or other variables, this is actually based on time. So if time is important, you know, you want to say something happens, you have 5 seconds to do it. This could be a good approach. Okay. So to recap, we can use setTimeout, setInterval for simple kind of delayed function calls. But the drawback to these is we don't have access to how much time has been spent, how much time has passed. So if we want to do this, we can build our own timers using the millis command from P5.js and just do a little bit of housekeeping, bookkeeping behind the scenes. So record the duration, the timestamp, and then compare how much time between right now and the last time we recorded a timestamp to program our timers. Okay, so that's it for this example, and I'll see you in the next one.